My parents both had that value. My mom, her mom, was a member of the National Liberation League, which was an organization formed in the 1930s by Sizwe. And she was a community activist, and she instilled that kind of value in her children. So they were never afraid. They knew who they were. They lived independently, but they also thought analytically about the world. My father was the one who took us to the beach on weekends in summer. We went to beaches that had boards up called, that said whites only, because it was apartheid. And we'd sit on the beach with our picnic, and once we were comfortable, the police would come and ask us to leave because we're not allowed there. And we would complain eventually and say, but Daddy, why must we go to that beach every time, and then they're going to chase us away? But my father was performing an act of defiance. And in so doing, he was also raising my awareness of things that were wrong. So that is the kind of exposure, or the early days really of my exposure. When I got to high school in 1979, I met the characters of 1976, the young people who had awoken in 1976. They were older than me, they were at high school, and I was exposed to theories, philosophies. I was reading Marxist literature. I also joined the church youth group, and because of the university students that had awoken in 1976 who were part of the church youth movement, I was introduced to liberation theology, which challenged faith, us who believed in Christianity. It really challenged us to question the use or the value or the meaning of Christianity in the face of injustice and poverty. And this really, really spoke to me. I was very, very inspired. I understood my calling in the world through liberation theology. And so I was drawn deeper and deeper into a movement of very radical young people coming out of, many of them coming out of church organizations. So there was a level of skills to be able to start organizations, to be able to organize campaigns and so on. Skills that we learned by being office bearers in youth groups in the church. And this was combined with the elders who we found in the townships. These were older people who had been in exile due to the activities in the 60s, or who had been on Robben Island, served their time, and they were now back in the community, serving a banning order at home and so forth. But in secret, they were prepared to advise, to guide, to teach. We would sit and listen to people. I would be picked up on a Saturday morning by a comrade, and I wouldn't even know where I was going. And the next thing I know, I'm sitting listening to a wiser, older person who's speaking to us in the ways that we so much wanted our parents, that generation, to speak to us, to guide us. But because of fear, their experience of struggle had been limited. So we had these few individuals who, it was really a treasure to be able to sit with them and learn from them. But this all had to be done in secret. None of these things we did was allowed. It wasn't allowed by the government. It wasn't allowed by your school or your church. It wasn't allowed by your parents for different reasons. Parents felt that you need to get a good education so that you can have a good job, so that you can make a future for yourself in this miserable country. They saw no end to the miserableness of the life we had under apartheid. So the point of your whole life was so that you can survive in the miserableness of it. And what we were reading, and more we were learning about struggles in other parts of the world where people were winning their freedom, because South Africa was one of the last places to experience oppression while in that cycle of oppression. We were learning that there's hope, that there is a way out, that the South Americans have done it, that the people in the rest of Africa had done it. So we knew there was a different way, but we needed some guidance also from people who'd tried and tested some things before. So these older people were of extreme value to us. In the 1980s, the country went through a wave of politicization where so many black people became aware of what was wrong, of the possibilities of change, and more organizations were now in place in all spheres of society. And within the church, and I got quite involved in the church in challenging the old and talking a language of liberation theology. So churches eventually started in the 80s. You see people like Archbishop Tutu taking a major public stand. You see various important documents and statements coming out of the faith, what we then start to call the faith-based movement. It was in this time that I joined the Justice and Peace organization in our church, and because I went to a school that did not want any student activism, I started a Justice and Peace group when I was in Standard 7, which was 1980. I started a Justice and Peace group, and I was at a Catholic school, and the nun banned this group, ironically. And we then said we don't believe in a prefect system, because this is the system that they had in place for law and order in the school, in all schools generally. But some schools had a student representative council as well. So we said we want a student representative council. They said no. And then I was part of a group of students who started inciting, as they would say, inciting other students at the school to be involved in activities in support of students in less privileged schools than ours. So I became very aware as a person in the church organization, and even in our humble home, that there were people worse off than us. And I was always driven by a sense, a consciousness about that there was such a divide in our society amongst people who I felt was the same like me, but yet they were worse off than me. Through our youth group, I went to visit a number of places where people didn't have homes, where people didn't have toilets, where young people had no school building. And it's crazy for me to think that I was privileged, because really there was so much that we were lacking, but I felt a sense of privilege, and with that a sense of guilt that drove my commitment to change in South Africa. And so that commitment has been something that led me to be involved in not just organizational politics, what we call mass mobilization, but also in underground activities, illegal activities in illegal organizations, and then eventually also in the armed struggle. When I saw how the police the state declared a state of emergency. The first one was in 1985. And then again in 1986, they declared a state of emergency, which turned us into a military zone, basically, and gave the police a license to beat anyone on the street, to kill, to shoot rubber bullets or live ammunition, whatever they saw fit to do. So I began to assist with the taking of statements when lawyers were drawn in to help people, because we decided we're going to also make cases against the state regarding this. And I felt the helplessness that the people felt who were so innocently drawn into this. They didn't have the politics, they didn't have the awareness, they didn't have the conscientization, they read no Marxism, but they just walked around the corner in the neighborhood and they were attacked. And I felt for the helplessness, and I then decided, you know what, we can't fight back with stones, we need guns. So I chose to be involved in the armed struggle. I don't believe violence is an answer. I don't believe war is an answer to these problems. But in a time of desperation and helplessness, it was an avenue, and it did give us a sense that we that we were able to fight back in some ways. It was in this time that I joined the Justice and Peace organization in our church, and because I went to a school that did not want any student activism, I started a Justice and Peace group when I was in Standard 7, which was 1980. And then I was part of a group of students who started inciting, as they would say, inciting other students at the school to be involved in activities in support of students in less privileged schools than ours. I felt my comrades in the armed struggle, in the unit I was involved in, the cell, the detachment I was involved in, everyone was arrested. Through our youth group, I went to visit a number of places where people didn't have homes, where people didn't have toilets. So I think I've had a sense of, and for me, I can't speak here about an overwhelming event to experience, but I'm speaking about an overwhelming emotion, which is that kind of guilt when other people suffer, and you want to suffer with almost. I have been able to work, and I'm so blessed that all the jobs I've had, I've chosen to work in the interest of building a better life for particularly people who have it the worst in our country. So I'm very excited for the future, and I want to be part of the next phase of the fight, and I'm inviting whoever you are listening or watching to join us. Thank you.